Laura,
All
I'll
right.
let you.
Yes, let's kick it off. Day 4, the last day of the Beginner Gardener Intensive 2021 is Become an Indoor Gardening Genius. For today's workshop, if you've been with us for the other workshops this week, you probably know these, so I'll just go quickly. Put any of your questions that you have in the Q&A function, which is in the bottom of your toolbar. That'll make it easier for us to sort when we go to the Q&A at the end of the workshop. We are recording right now, and you'll get an email with this recording and the follow-up resources. I guess, yeah, this is the end, so you don't have to worry about the Zoom link again. These are the workshops that we've done for this year's BGI. The first day was garden basics. Then we did soil health and compost. Yesterday's workshop was increasing your garden production. So all of those are already posted on grownyc.distancelearning.org, along with a lot of additional resources. And we'll be doing the same for today's workshop. I'm going to pass it over to our special guest presenter today, which is Christian Gilces, and he is an urban agriculturist in New York City. He was also an intern for our program at Grow NYC School Gardens this past spring. He is a student at John Bowne Agricultural High School. He has his own website, cluckcluckmoo.com, as well as you can find him on Instagram at the same name. And he's already led, I think, 3 workshops, maybe more for us in the past. So we are very excited to have him back. You're in for a treat. And as a challenge, throw him your hardest indoor gardening questions, because so far he hasn't been able to not answer any of them. So Christian, I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm so glad that you can make it today to gain more knowledge about indoor gardening to become an indoor gardening genius. I'm so excited to be presenting the 4th and final day of the Beginner Garden Intensive. Today, you will learn a 4th skill to add on to gardening basics, soil health, and garden production. Now, as Laura said, to get started with becoming an indoor gardening genius. More specifically, our mission today is to learn all about growing vegetables indoors, indoor growing tips, and more houseplant care tricks. Next slide. I'm sure that we all know about what indoor gardening is, just growing indoor houseplant or plants indoors, but indoor gardening is more intricate than we thought. Indoor gardening is so unique because there's not unlimited full sun in our homes, and our homes are not usually the best environment for most plants. And because of this, we need to work a little more harder to get the right care for our indoor houseplants, but that's definitely possible. And you're gonna learn how to do that today by mimicking our plants' natural habitats for your home. I mentioned environments in the last slide and how important they are for plant success. Just like the outdoors, every part of your home has a different microclimate. I have some examples on the screen like sunny windows, humid bathrooms, dark corners, and dry rooms. All of these microclimates can be beneficial or detrimental to indoor plant growth. So it's important to be able to identify what microclimate you're dealing with in the specific part of your home. Depending on what plants you have, you can make a decision and experiment with different microclimates to see what the plants like. But you could also make an educated guess or decisions based on knowledge for certain plants that you have. Like, for example, basil. Basil is typically an outdoor plant, and with this knowledge, we can assume that our basil is not going to appreciate a dark corner because of the extreme lack of sun that a basil plant would get outside. But then on the other hand, we may know that mint is an avid grower and is very hardy, as I know the person in the chat with the long growing mint or that just got the mint knows. So using this information, we can assume that we can place mint in a sunny windowsill or a slightly darker one, and the mint will still thrive and grow. I prepared a few lists on plants that we can grow indoors. First, we have houseplants. Everyone here probably has or has had a houseplant in their home before. Listed on the slide, we have some plant genuses that are the most common choices for houseplants. Houseplant care is determined by all the amount of sunlight that you're able to provide and the microclimates that we talked about before. Watering is dependent on the genus and species, and you don't have to water as much as other types of indoor plants with houseplants. Next slide. If you want to take a more decorative spin on indoor gardening, you can do an indoor gardening flower options like bulbs or flowering houseplants. You can force bulbs like hyacinths, tulips, paper whites, and amaryllis to bloom indoors. Kalanchos, cyclamens, begonias, and indoor roses all bloom for extended periods of time and can offer a nice bold color to your home. Again, these plants are dependent on microclimates to thrive and your consistent watering. Here are some edible plants that we can grow indoors. These plants are all simple growers. Don't need a lot of root space, don't need pollination, and don't require a ton of care. That's why they're such great indoor growers. An appropriate microclimate and appropriate watering is crucial for plant success because of how much resources these plants have outdoors. The beauty of indoor gardening is the spectrum that you will notice when it comes to plant care difficulty. It's like ginger, the one pictured in the slide, is more of a complex plant, so you could try after you master lettuce and your herbs, then you could tackle ginger. Next slide. An interesting indoor edible plant to grow are mushrooms, because first, who says that they've grown their own mushrooms in their home? That's super cool. And mushrooms don't need pruning, excessive watering, intense sun, and won't take over your home. I do want to mention really quick that you do not want to grow mushrooms under your bed because of the spores, and you do not want to ever take mushrooms from the wild and bring them into your home and consume them without knowing what they are. That's just a helpful tip for everyone. Second to last, we have herbs. Herbs are a great way to introduce yourself to edible indoor plants. In my experience, houseplants and edible indoor plants are completely different, even though they can both be grown in indoor environments. Herbs can teach you the ropes on watering and sun requirements to then move on to edible indoor plants. Plus, they grow fast and you could just cut and regrow them. Lastly is microgreens. I love microgreens because all you have to do is set them and forget them, and boom, in a couple of days you have a delicious addition to your dinner plate. The purpose of microgreens is to have a flavor of a vegetable without needing the vegetable. For example, if you sprout broccoli microgreens, then you could add a broccoli flavor to your salad or on top of a protein. You can choose all sorts of edible vegetable seeds to sprout, except any vegetables that are in the nightshade family, like tomatoes, because they are poisonous. And then you put the seeds in a container, you cover them or expose them to light, depending on the seed, and then you wet them and watch them sprout. And when you see the little leaves pop up, you can cut the leaves off of the root and enjoy them. Although there are plants that will thrive in your home, that does not mean that all outdoor plants will thrive in your home for different reasons. Plants like tomatoes and peppers need many plants to help them bear fruit. Other fruits like avocados and lemons will also not bear fruit for the same reason, and these plants will also get very big and will need heavy pruning for to be able to stay inside the home, which will also most likely cause them to not bear fruit. A common question that people ask is if they can bring their indoor plants outside. The answer is yes. You want to have fun with your plants. Bringing them outside can help them grow faster because of the increase in heat, humidity, and sunlight. Bringing your plants outdoors can also allow you to see how you are with outdoor plants. If you come outside and your houseplant is dying, then you have to retreat, bring your houseplant back inside, analyze what went wrong, and then you know what to improve with your outdoor growing technique. When bringing your plants outdoors, you cannot just bring them outside and transition them from low light to intense direct light. That will shock them and then kill them again. You have to gradually bring your plants outside. So if you have your plant in your living room, then you want to put it inside of your garage for a little, just so it can adjust to the temperature and the light, and then bringing outside, but not directly from the living room to your patio. And then lastly, exposing them to outside weather and conditions so they don't die of shock is a transition. When you start and or expand your indoor garden, you're going to need lots of more places to put all of your new plants. Here are a few options to do that. You can first get in touch with your creative side and make a macrame plant hanger to put pots in to fill up all the wall space. Macrame is just weaving or knotting of yarn and string to be able to hold plant pots. Another option is purchasing metal wall mounts, especially made for terracotta pots, as you can see on your screen. These just have to be screwed into the wall and boom, you can hang your plant pots. Next, we have wood wall mounts. If you have houseplants that are epiphytes like aroids or orchids, you can take them out of their substrate, wrap sphagnum moss around their roots lightly, and tie them to a wall mount to simulate nature and act as a nice decor piece for your wall. Lastly, we have a Kokodama, as you can see on the bottom right. Kokodamas are super fun because they allow you to change up your indoor gardening game by adding something unique to your home. Kokodamas are plants that have their roots covered with decorative moss so that they can be displayed or hung up. It's really creative, functional, and easy to do. Something really important to note when deciding where you want your plant indoors is that all pots need to have drainage. That's super important. Any way that you can hang up or mount your plants needs to allow water to drain off the root ball. This prevents overwatering and root rot, which is common because indoors there isn't a lot of sunlight to quickly evaporate all the water that you pour in. Excuse the heavy rain noise if you could hear it. Anyways, if you have all of these draining pots and mounts, where can you drain the water? You could take your plants to the shower or sink and give them a little rain session so that they feel at home while getting watered, and the draining water goes into the sink or drain so you don't have any mess. And you could also start enjoying saucers more. I finally purchased a terracotta saucer for all of my houseplant pots so I don't get any spillage, which was a big problem after every week of watering my plants. So the saucers will also help the plants absorb any water that they need, as opposed to all the extra water just spilling onto the floor. A topic that I want to touch on is plant design. You probably noticed that houseplants have become really trendy over the years, especially during the pandemic. Plants carry many benefits when used to decorate your living space. First, plants add life to a space. They make the space look more homey. The color green has turned into a neutral color because so many people have been using plants to decorate their homes. Plants go with everything. And lastly, plants actually are better than just decorating the space. They are proven to improve your mood, and some plants like a peace lily can filter your air. Because houseplants have gotten more and more trendy, there are some houseplant cons that I need to point out to you all today. People usually assume that air plants are the easiest plants to take care of ever because they don't need soil or much water. They essentially take care of themselves. This is wrong because air plants need to be constantly misted to stay hydrated and come from complex ecosystems to help them grow big and strong. Air plants also grow super slow, which doesn't make them very satisfying for a beginner grower. Next, we have variegated plants, more specifically variegated monsteras or pink philodendrons. These plants go for hundreds to thousands of dollars. I know most of you have probably heard of them because of their unique and their highly in-demand variegation. The issue with these plants are that their variegation never really stays long-term. After you purchase them, the colors go away and you're stuck with a plain plant that you could have bought for a fraction of the price. Because of how expensive and in demand these plants are, growers are scamming people, claiming that a plant node or leaf that they are selling is a variegated monstera or pink philodendron when it is not. Okay, there's thunder. I wanted to go over some common issues that indoor gardeners might face. So we have how to fix your broken plant, or oops, I broke my plant. So sunburn is really common when your plant is delicate and you accidentally place it in direct light. You will notice brown leaves or tiny brown spots on the leaf showing that the plant cells are exploding on your plant. So you just want to move your plant out of the windowsill and just let it recover and cut off the leaves, because when your plant's leaves are sunburnt, they're not going to come back. So just cut them off and just let your plant recover with less sun. Next, we have underwatering, which is a really common, because if you're a busy person, it's easy to forget to water your plant or water it too late. So you will notice that your plant's leaves will droop heavily, like in the image on the screen, and the lower leaves will start yellowing. So a quick fix to that is to deeply water your plant. And what I mean by that is soaking your plant pot. So probably filling your sink up and putting the pot in there for an hour and letting just the roots soak up all the water that they need. Next, we have fertilizer burn, which is something that people usually don't realize is possible. Fertilizer burn happens when you over fertilize your plants. So you're gonna most likely see brown leaf edges or a sharp turn in your plant's health. So let's say that you have your watering in check and your sunlight is perfect, but you fertilize your plants 2 times in a week by accident, then you can expect to see some brown leaf edges, and you know it's not sunburn or a pest or a different issue. You know that you over fertilize and you're experiencing fertilizer burn. So you could treat fertilizer burn by completely watering your plant and soaking it with fresh water to let all the fertilizer drain out of the soil and start fresh. So next we have um, on the next slide. Yes, okay. Pest damage, which comes in many different ways, like holes in a leaf or brown leaves or even curled leaves. If you see little holes in your plant leaves, then you should do an inspection to check for any little spider-like bugs moving on the leaves. And you could treat this with neem oil or any other pest treatment. And you could even rinse your plants first to see if the pests go away and you don't experience any issues. Next, we have root damage, which is a hard issue to notice at first. And you need to be really in tune with your plant and be a detective to look at your plant symptoms and analyze all of your care. So because of the roots, they aren't immediately accessible and visible. It can be hard to know when your plant isn't thriving, or why your plant isn't thriving rather. So if you notice constant yellowing of the leaves and you're adjusting your watering and sunlight and nothing is helping, or if you overwatered and you know that you overwatered, you can do a check by taking the plant out of its pot and checking for white, plump, fuzzy, healthy roots. So if you see black, mushy roots, they're rotted, and you should remove those and just step back on the watering for a month and letting your plant recover. Yeah. And then again, too much sun. So different from sunburn, because plants who need low light, like ZZ plants or other plants like Sansevierias, if you give them too much light, then you're gonna have a stage before you get sunburn where your plant just doesn't do well. It's not happy. It's not growing new leaves. It just doesn't want that much sun. So the way to fix that is to just move it back from a windowsill. Do research on your plants constantly. Always be checking up on your plants. Because if you know that you have a low light plant and you're putting it in full direct sun, then you know not really good for the plant. Let me move it away. Let me let it rest in a really low light corner in a nice microclimate that it likes, and it'll be thriving again. So yeah. So now we have Laura and Kristen who volunteered to show their plants just to give examples of issues that we described in the slides.
Okay, I'm embarrassed, but I'm doing this for educational purposes. So this is my pothos plant. I've had it for about 3 years now, And what happened was that back when like COVID hit, I think I was very distracted and I didn't water it for more than a month, right? Because I didn't know what day of the week. Actually, I mean, it could have been 2 months. Like, I'm really unclear on how long this went without water. But by the time I noticed it, it only had one leaf down here on its stem. So like, I left it because I didn't want to take away its one leaf. And now it's grown in some more at the top. It still has these very long like vines. They all have leaves at the bottom, but it never filled in. So I've got these very long vines with no leaves. So I'm remembering to water it. It's got this growth at the top. Plant doctor, what do I do?
So this is a typical example of underwatering. And a lot of you probably experienced it, and you're probably dealing with underwatering right now, and you have a plant that looks similar. So first, congratulations to you for getting your plant back on track with the watering, and it's grown back. And a tip for research purposes to know is that pothos love wet soil. They could live in full water if they could, if you put them there. So pothos do not like dry soil at all. So just keep up with the watering once a week. And yes, that's the perfect way. And you could propagate to make other little mini plants if you love that plant, or you could just stick it back into the original pot to make the plant look fuller.
So if I wanted to propagate, I could just cut it under one of its nodes here and then just cut the rest of the spine away because it doesn't need that anymore, right? So I could start myself like 3 more plants at this point.
Yeah,
that seems like a win.
Yes.
So, thank you, Kristen.
You're welcome. Laura?
All right, so I've been wanting to get a prayer plant for a while, and I saw one at a greenhouse recently, but it was not in good shape, but it was a very good price. So I'm hoping to like bring it back to life. It also right now does have like flowers coming out of it, which was pretty cool. And I didn't even know these ones had flowers. But you can see here that it has what looks like fertilizer burn, which I didn't realize until I saw your photo about fertilizer burn. And it's also, it's not centered. It's like definitely leaning one way. Like they just stuck it in the back of the greenhouse and left it there and never rotated it. So it started growing all one direction.
Yeah, so again, another typical issue that we may be experiencing, especially during quarantine, over fertilizing our plants. I know I've accidentally done it, where I'm just eager and I want my plants to grow for spring, and there I am fertilizing every week when you're supposed to do it once every 2 weeks. So again, the simple fix to that, which you're probably doing, is just watering your plants with fresh water and nothing else. Fully wetting it. And a cool tip for that plant is that it's actually like a vining plant, so it'll grow long vines. So it's normal if it leans, if you
I didn't know that.
And you could eventually propagate them and cut them, and you could also cut off the leaves if you don't like the burned ones, but you don't have to. But that is a very fast grower, especially during spring. So that'll be gone in no time.
All right, cool. So this is actually a great time to prune it back.
Yes, if you want to.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. If we could just pull the PowerPoint back up real quick.
Yes.
Yes, okay. So again, I just wanted to give another thanks to everybody for coming to the last day of the Grow NYC annual Beginner Garden Intensive, and a big thanks to everybody who attended the other workshops. If you happen to have any questions about your houseplants or garden after these workshops, you can email Grow NYC at schoolgardens@grownyc.org or email me at cluckcluckmoo@gmail.com. And you can also check out my other ultimate houseplant starter guides on the Grow NYC distance learning page that Laura will show all of you guys. Yeah, so if you ever need a reference, you could look up to the Grow NYC, the distance learning page, and check them out to answer any of your questions. And then again, finally, Instagram and Facebook at @ClockWithMumu if you want to check out any other references, if your questions are still not answered, and then Grow NYC on the same platforms. But now I want to open it up to questions.
Okay, we have many.
Yes,
we have many.
perfect.
So I'm reading, just a reminder to folks, I'm reading the questions from the Q&A. So down at the bottom of your screen, there's a little icon that says Q&A. If you want to drop them in there, that's where we're reading from, and I'm going to do as many as we have time for. So, Christian,
Yes.
how close can plants be to a plant that has scale? And I'm adding this part, if you could just explain what scale is to our very beginners out there. Yeah.
So scale is a pest. It looks like a scale because it has like a hard shell over itself, and it looks like tiny little hard bumps. So it's hard to get rid of because of that little covering that it has on top of it. So the treatment that you're usually treating with can't penetrate and fully get it off. You want to scrape it off. So I would say keep it as far as possible. Don't try it. Don't try testing the waters with how far you could keep plants with another pest, because you don't want that pest. Scale is so hard to get rid of, and it's small. And then when you think you got rid of it, it's actually still there. And then you have to do treatments like for a month long, and it's just a big process. So I would say 6 feet away. Practice social distancing with your plant. Keep it far away. Don't try it. Yes. And then if you're using equipment that touch that plant with scale, disinfect and make sure that you're fully cleaning your equipment before touching your other plants. Yeah.
I've heard you say that before, even with like propagating
Yes.
plants, it's good to just clean your tools between use. Is it okay to put plants that were previously indoors outside during warmer months when it's like above 50 degrees and then bring them back inside during colder months again? So indoor, outdoor plants.
Yes, that's perfect. A lot of houseplant caretakers actually do that. They bring their plants out during the spring and summer so they could grow huge. So you could definitely do that. But again, gradually. So if you have your plant in front of a windowsill, you could open that windowsill and let some air flow onto your plant just so it could get accustomed to that. Bring it closer to the windowsill so it gets more sun, just so you know that that plant is a good candidate to go outside in the first place. And then when you bring it back, you want to do the same thing. So don't just pick up your plant one day and then bring it inside. It will shock, and all of that growth that you got during the warmer months is gonna die. So you want to transition it. So probably if you have a garage, put it in there. Then try putting it on there before you fully bringing it inside.
This question specifically is about maidenhair ferns.
Okay.
How do I stop killing this plant? That's the exact question.
Yeah, so ferns are really hard plants. I finally just got success with a rabbit's foot fern, which is the easiest fern in my opinion. But a maiden's hair fern, I would say humidity is key. I have a greenhouse right next to me, so any plant that I put in it grows because it has super high humidity. But ferns, the key is humidity. So, and you cannot, the minute that your plant dries out just slightly, it's gonna die, because that's what I've experienced with my fern. One day of a missed watering day, your plant is gone. So I would say like alarms on your phone or put it on your calendar every day that you need to water, just so you know. And then really high humidity. So a really nice trick is to just put rocks into a saucer and put that under your plant. If you don't have a electric humidifier, but if you can get one, then I would suggest that.
Okay, question about plants that can be harmful to cats or pets. Laura, I think we have a resource on this. The ASPCA has a whole list of plants that are okay for pets and plants that aren't. So maybe we can drop that in the chat so that people can look.
Yeah, I have that already linked up also for your additional resources when you all get that email.
Yeah.
I will say that also depends on your pet, because some pets don't care at all Like
Thankfully,
the
that's
greenhouse
my
where I got
situation.
this, yeah, the greenhouse where I got this plant, like there's a cat just like laying in the greenhouse among all these toxic plants but didn't care about them. But if you have a pet who's actually interested in eating your plants, then you got to watch out for that.
Which
Yes.
I'm not blaming my cat, but she is part of what happened to this pothos. So yeah, she likes to mess with plants. Okay, let's talk about orchids. How do you keep an orchid alive after it blooms?
Yes. So orchids, a typical issue that I've seen which causes the orchid downfall is the moss that they come in from the store or greenhouse. And that moss is tightly packed around the roots, and orchids are epiphytes, which means that they don't grow in any medium. They grow on trees or other plants in the wild. So you can imagine their roots are free, constant airflow, they don't get soaked, and they're not constantly wet for long periods of time. So the quick fix to keeping your orchid alive is switching it from sphagnum moss or soil or any medium that holds lots of water for extended periods of time, is using orchid bark or lots of perlite into the soil or sphagnum moss to keep your orchid's roots drier for longer periods of time.
Okay. Can overwatered soil be revived? If yes, how? And what do you recommend that gardeners do when they've overwatered?
Yeah. So if you realize that you overwatered, I recommend completely changing the soil, like right then and there. Get all that wet soil out, put in some nice dry soil, because you want your plant to be fixed right then. Because if you keep your your wet soil with the plant, its roots are going to keep rotting until it fully dries out. So the best bet is to completely get rid of that soaked soil, put in some dry, and then that's the best way to revive your plant that you've overwatered. And then don't forget to cut off all of the rotted roots to make way for the new healthy roots.
Okay. Can you take herbs that have been growing outside all summer indoors? At what temperature should you start doing this? And then when would you bring them out again next year?
Yeah. So when bringing herbs indoors, I recommend to again gradual. So since they have been outside for so long and that's all they've known, that's what they're going to expect. And it might be hard at first because you might experience a huge root system that you might not have space for indoors. So you could give those roots a slight trim, and then you also want to prune your plant because you might also have a big, I know like basils get gigantic. So if you have space for that to bring in source, then you can, but if you don't, you could prune it. It'll be okay. In terms of temperature, if it's 100 degrees outside every single day, um, then your plant will get shocked when it comes inside to your regular room temperature. So like a 10 degrees difference every stage until bringing it inside would be good.
And same for when it's time to bring them out again, like a
Yeah.
10-degree, right? Because if they go from your like climate controlled indoor space to out, that's going to shock them. So in the reverse, you have to
Yes.
transition them out. Okay, good. Any recommendations for maintaining lemon verbena during the winter months?
Yes. So you want to bring it inside. I'm pretty sure that lemon verbena is a perennial. So if you just trim it down all the way to the base, then it'll come up next season. But if you want to bring it in, then you don't want to prune because then you're cutting off all the flowers. So just um, again, the gradual change is very important, especially with perennials like that. You don't want to disturb the roots so much during the winter months because then you're going to disturb the roots growing patterns when you bring it back outside. So once you transition it in early fall, I would recommend none later, none earlier. In early fall, you could take the plant out of the ground, put it in a nice pot, fresh soil, bring it inside gradually.
Okay. Here's a question about the picture you showed before of the orchid on the wood block. If you are, yeah, let's bring that up for a second. The question is, so it's this bottom left-hand corner.
Yep.
How do you water that? It doesn't have a pot.
Yeah, so with that, with any wall mount, you would just stick it in the sink or in a tray. in a bucket and just let it soak there. The beauty with that is that, again, we talked about orchids and they don't like a lot of that stuff around their roots. So that's perfect for it. So you just soak it or mist it constantly. Like if you mist it every day, you won't have to soak it. Yeah.
Okay. The edges, if the edge of leaves turn brown, what can they do to address it?
Yeah. So you might be
Intensify.
experiencing
Yeah.
fertilizer burn. That's a possibility. So you just want to fully rinse out your plant, soil, fully soak it, let all that water drain out, and hopefully you'll see a fix in the new growth. But once your plant's leaves are turning brown, they're not going to revert back. You want to you want to analyze and observe the new growth that comes in. A pest might also be the cause of that, hurting the roots, hurting the plant's roots, which are causing the older leaves to turn brown on the edges. And it might also be root rot. So you could take your plant out of the pot and see if your plant has no root system anymore, then it's slowly killing off all of the older leaves to make way and to be able to sustain itself. So a lot of these issues overlap each other, but it's just you just have to stay patient, be a detective, like I said, and just slowly look over your plant and see what you're doing.
Is there a time of the day that is best to water indoor plants?
No, there isn't it's not like outdoors where you should water early in the morning or late at night just so the sun doesn't burn your plant. That's not going to happen indoors. So you could really water any time of the day whenever your plant is dry.
I love this next question. It's how do I provide drainage for containers that don't have holes? I can just make them, right? You can make holes in containers.
Yes.
If you have a drill, you can
Mhm.
pop a few holes. The one thing you'll want to make sure of is that you have the right drill bit. So,
Yes.
you know, if it's like a porcelain pot or like a terracotta, you'll want like a masonry bit as opposed to just using like something you'd use on wood. So you can. And then otherwise, do you have any other tips to add to that too?
No, the drill bit is extremely important because you don't want to crack your pot
Yeah.
with the wrong bit. You don't want to punch it or like hammer something into it because that's going to break it. But if you need to plant your pot immediately and you only have plastic pots, I would say that's the best option because you could make a hole with a screwdriver or something really quick. Yeah.
And that's like a lot of these trendy pots like come without holes because they like aesthetically
Yes.
look so nice, but that's like it's kind of a problem. Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to bring up. We could have added that to the trendy houseplant myths to debunk. But and then what I also see on a lot of blogs and stuff is people say you can use these like volcanic stones or gravel, which I've tried that stuff. It does not work as well as just actual drainage. So what I recommend people who want to use cool pots is to put a plastic pot that does have drainage holes inside the decorative pot, so that when you water it,
so those are called cash pots or cash pots. So it's like a decorative pot that you just keep on the outside of your like regular terracotta pot, and then every time you water, you just take it out and then put it back into its decorative pot.
You could probably make like a sub-irrigated watering system out of that, right? Like if you ran a wick through the bottom of your like plastic pot into your decorative one, and then you just use the decorative one as your reservoir. Maybe that's nobody tells you that when you buy these fancy things, but maybe you could do it that way. Okay. Thoughts. What are good vegetable plants that you can grow indoors in very good sunlight? Kind of had that slide before.
Yes, so you could just show the picture.
There we go. So these are all things that'll do fine indoors. And somebody asked about beets too, if you could do beets inside. But yeah, of course. So, okay. All right. What does it mean if water seems to be running through the soil very quickly and the soil's dry to the touch? She has a moisture meter that says it's dry, like a 1 or a 2, and doesn't think she's overwatering?
This question is so important to me. I've experienced this so much over my plant journey, and it's because of the peat in your the peat moss in your soil mixture, or maybe you're using coconut coir. Those substances, when they dry out, it's extremely hard to re-moisten them and make them loose. So that's what you're experiencing. If you're probably using a peat heavy soil, which is super typical in houseplant soil mixes. So you want to completely soak it. So that's what I always have to do, because sometimes some of my cactuses or sensivarias don't like to be watered every week, so their soil completely goes rock hard. You want to soak your plant so all the water could penetrate in, because that's an extremely common thing that people don't realize, and that because they think I don't want to overwater, or they let their plant go dry for 2 weeks when it's supposed to be 1, and then their soil goes hard, and then they think they're watering, but that's the issue. So soak your plant. Yes, that helped me so much.
Can I add another thing that happened to me because I was neglecting my plants so much and not taking good care of it like Christian takes care of his plants? Is mine was extremely root bound. So I had one and the water was just like not staying in the pot at all. It was like immediate, like I would put it in and it would just like a waterfall out the bottom, and I took it out of the pot and it was like 80% root ball. So there was hardly any soil left to actually hold the water. So I had to you can trim the roots, or you can just put it in a bigger pot.
Yeah.
Actually, that's the next question, is talking about could you tell us a little more about like the depth of pots that you want to use for certain plants?
Yes, that's a perfect question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I talked about this in my Repot With Me live on the Grow NYC Instagram page. You always want to repot your plant in a pot that's 2 inches bigger than its original pot. So that's always just a nice guide to have when you're trying to pick out a new pot for your plant. But it's all a sense of just thinking about what makes sense, what's proportional to your root size. So if you have a plant that's this big, so you could imagine that the root ball is like this big, you don't want to put it in a 10-inch pot, because then it'll be overwhelmed. There's too much space, the plant will shock. But if you have a root ball that's that big, like this big, and you put it in a 2-inch pot, then you're gonna have to remove lots of roots, and then your leaves are gonna suffer. So it's all just that 2-inch guide, also very helpful during my houseplant journey that you could use and follow.
If someone's plant has root rot and then they trim off the rotten parts, do they just place it back in that's it? Just put it right back in its pot, in its soil?
Yes. So with the root rot, you want to change the soil out. I always say change the soil out, because you're having root rot because there's bacteria in your soil because you're overwatering. So you don't want to reintroduce that bacteria back to the plant that has no roots, because then you're basically just fully rotting out your full plant, and then it won't have a chance to regrow back. So change the soil. And yeah, so if you have a plant like a pothos, which does really good in propagating in water, then if your plant's roots rot away, then you can just pop it in water before you put it back into soil. Or if you have a plant like a Sansevieria and you fully rot it out, then you could just put it back in soil.
What kind of fertilizer do you recommend for plants? I know it depends on the plant, but what are some that are like old standbys?
Yeah, so am I allowed to say brands?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes. These are brands that Christian has used, and they have worked for his plants, but we are not endorsing them.
Yes. So a lot of people think houseplant specific fertilizers are important. They are for some plants. So there's a big variety. I know brands have a big variety of African violet fertilizers, or succulent fertilizers, or tropical houseplant fertilizers. So there's a big range that you could choose from that give each plant species their own needs. So you could find the brands that do that. But I I've experimented actually with the Miracle Grow outdoor fertilizer just to see if it's possible and if you need to use a house specific fertilizer, and it's worked for me. My plants love it. They're not, except for that one exception of one of my plants that burned. All of my other ones were fine. They enjoyed it. They're growing. Yes, but any fertilizer really you could use. Just follow the instructions for the amount of water and you'll be okay.
What kind of grow light is best for plants if your indoor
Mhm.
light is not so hot?
Yes. So I've always grown houseplants without a light and it worked, but when I got all of my grow lights in my greenhouse, it completely changed the game. So I definitely recommend if you can get grow lights. It's so helpful. You always want to pick out lights that have the right lights in them. So plants cannot absorb green light. They love blue light and red light. So buy bulbs that are for plant growing. So not regular bulbs for your lamp. Um, Plant growing bulbs. So I'm pretty sure you could also use light that your pets use, like reptiles, because they have that full spectrum as well.
Huh.
So yeah, if you have those laying around, then you could substitute with that. But yes, always follow the spectrum. Yes.
Here's a follow up on that. Not that they asked, I'm just curious. In your greenhouse, do you use like the lights that look like bulbs or more of the strip lights in your
Yeah,
greenhouse?
I use the strips. So
Yeah,
I have like strips that I put on top, and then each row of my
gets its own.
greenhouse.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then also just a tip for the grow lights is not to put your plants too close to the grow light, and then also not too far, because a lot of people might have a decorative grow light in their plant design. So I think 3 feet above is not gonna do anything for your plant above a leaf because then it doesn't reach that far. But if your plant is touching it constantly, then it might burn. So
And you
again,
have to, a lot of people don't know, you have to like adjust it as your plant
yes.
is growing. So it's not like you set it up and leave it forever. You have
Mhm.
to, yeah. Laura, were you going to add to that?
Yeah, a question I got from someone who is just starting with grow lights is, can I just leave them on 24 hours a day so that my plant keeps growing 24 hours a day? And I was like, no, the plants need to sleep too. So like 12 on,
Yes.
12 off. You can experiment to see if you could do slightly different, but it does need to sleep.
And it's good to
Yes.
do a timer for that because
Hmm.
for those of us who can't remember watering, like the light situation is another thing to forget. So timer.
Yes, timers.
Okay. All right. How do you deal with pests inside? So this person has some aphids inside.
Okay.
They're not so happy about.
Yeah, so aphids they're a journey to get rid of. But the good thing about them is that they're bigger than a spider mite or bigger than thrips. So you're able to see them gathering. So you want to fully expect all your leaves. They love living on the stems or the petioles or right under the leaf. So you always want to flip over the leaf. You never just want to look at your plant on top. You always want to flip the leaves over, look at the base of the stems. Neem oil, insecticidal soap, rinsing your plants, physically removing them are all good methods that you could use, but definitely neem oil or insecticidal soap for to make sure that they don't come back. Yeah.
Here's a question.
Oh, actually, before or ladybugs. A lot of people actually are not afraid to release ladybugs into their home.
Inside?
Yeah, like around their house plants. So that's an interesting thing that I've never experimented with. So if you have a greenhouse like me, you could possibly release a few ladybugs around your aphids and let them eat it.
That's like bringing the nature channel inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, okay, here's a question.
Yes.
This person has yellow mushrooms, not intentionally, growing on their indoor plants. What does
Okay.
it mean? That is.
Well, first you probably have wood chips or something in there. The spores probably got mixed into that soil. I don't know if you probably mix some outdoor soil with your indoor soil. There's many different possibilities, but it means that you have great soil, nutrient rich, and that you have healthy plants. So it's nothing really to worry about. But if it's a toxic mushroom, then remove it with caution. Um, I'm not sure about yellow mushrooms or how if they're toxic or yeah, Laura.
I've had yellow mushrooms growing in my yucca plant, and it didn't harm the plant at all, but they started to kind of like take over. So I just
Yes, they
kept,
definitely take over.
yeah, I just had to keep like taking them off. But once the spores are in the soil, you can't really get them out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a very specific.
Okay.
I'm probably not going to pronounce it right. I apologize to everybody in advance. The bottommost leaves of my Schefflera
Yeah, Schefflera. Okay. Yeah.
actinophilia turn yellow and drop off. Is that too much water? And they tried to root that variety and it just got mushy and rotted. They also
Yes.
tried root hormone, but that didn't work. So,
Mhm. Yeah, so Scheffleras or umbrella plants are
oh, that's so much easier.
yeah, they're really common. Like they're plants that you could have for years and years. Like those are plants that people have forever. But they're it's super easy to overwater because they have such a thick tissuey stem. Like it's not woody, it's fully fleshy. So super easy to overwater. I would say keep it at every 2 weeks. You could let the top 2 inches of your soil dry out. Because again, they're like peperomias. You don't like once you start overwatering, it just goes downhill from there. So you don't want to get to that point. But if you have yellowing leaves, don't worry. You could chop off the top of your plant. Possibly try you. And the thing is, when people propagate, you have to remember to change your water out constantly, or else bacteria might grow, and then that's what might lead, especially with those fleshy stem plants, bacteria to rot out the propagated stem. So always use fresh water, clean it out, never let it get slimy with your Schefflera cutting.
um, this person wants to know what they can do with soil after
Mhm.
they've grown microgreens. Can they dump it, keep it, compost it, reuse it?
Yeah. You could do anything with it. You could compost it, reuse it, mix it in, add more nutrients to the soil. But you don't really need soil to grow microgreens. You could grow them on a paper towel or just in water. So I don't know if that might be easier for you, so you don't have to pick out the soil out of the roots or clean your micro. Well, you still want to clean your microgreens, but you don't have to heavily clean them. Yeah, so you could try different mediums, but you could definitely reuse your soil.
Um, tips for reviving corn plants.
Yes, so I've sadly the season and it all died because of shock. So that's super common with baby corn, little nursery corn that you got your plant starts. So um, you don't want to plant it on a hot day. So reviving it depends on what stage it is at, how big it is. If it's like this big, like how mine was, then it's gone. Like once
Oh,
it wilts and it dies, and it's gone. If yours is like a foot long and the bottom leaves are yellowing, then it's okay. Just cut them off. Keep watering because outdoor plants they love water. So a constant fix that I've noticed is to just water more, and then your issues are gone. Um, so if your corn plant is 3 feet tall, then I would say that you're fine. But the smaller the plant and if you're experiencing issues, then it's gone. The bigger the plant and you're experiencing issues, it's definitely fixable. Just see how much sun and the watering.
how often do you recommend watering a large fiddle leaf fig? Thank you for
Yes.
an easy
Okay.
to pronounce plant.
So fiddle leaf figs are also really finicky plants. You'll notice little brown spots on the leaves once you overwater, which is super common. So I would say every 2 weeks, 2.5. Um, I would say let the top 2 inches of soil dry out before you water, nothing more. Yes, because once you overwater, you're gonna notice it, and that is never gonna go away. So, like 2 to 2.5 weeks.
Tips for regrowing elephant ears.
Another one that I've had trouble with and experimented with a lot. Elephant ears are tropical plants. They love humidity. They love heat. They need water. Once it's on the dry side, it can handle it for a couple of days. But the more extended time that it's without water, the more the bottom leaves are going to die, the more it goes downhill. I would say you can't really overwater them. It's really hard to, but once you do, the bulb will get mushy, and then once you notice that, then it's done. Like once the bulb gets mushy, it's done. So just start new. But if it's a new season, and because elephant ear is a perennial in our state, so if you have an elephant ear and it grew last season and it died back and you have it inside, I mean, you're saving it for this season. It's not dead. You just put it in the soil and it'll grow again. Yeah, so definitely try again. Just cut it back, put it in fresh new soil, keep watering it. It'll grow back because it's a bulb.
So summer's coming and people are going to start turning their ACs on. So can air
Yes.
conditioners harm plants in the summer, and how do you keep them healthy while you're using the AC?
Yes. So that's actually a really common issue with tropical plants, and then they're experiencing winter-like conditions inside. So it's just a sense of microclimates again that we discussed. So you might want to move your plant to another sunny space that doesn't have so much AC. Um, yeah, so just trial and error with that. And AC is actually the reason why you want to slowly transition your plants out during the summer. Because if it's really cold, and then it's like summer outside, like 100-degree weather, then there's obviously going to be shock. So just keep moving your plant, experiment, have fun with it.
Cool. And just to be mindful of everyone's time, it's 5 now, but we're going to answer one more question. How often do you fertilize indoor plants?
Yes. So the key is always 2 weeks, every 2 weeks. Nothing earlier, because then you're going to over fertilize and then your plant's leaves are going to burn. That's what happened to me. So stick to 2 weeks. Set a timer, put it on your calendar, just so you know, so you don't over fertilize.
Okay, so thank you so much. We are this is day 4 of the Beginner Gardener, and I just want to give a huge shout out to Christian. Christian is a John Bound High School student, and he just answered questions from you all for 30 minutes without batting an eye. So much love to Christian. And I want to give a shout out because I saw in the chat we have a couple of John Bound students here with us today who came out to support, including some future John Bound students that are starting next year as well. So if you have been tuning in with us all week, all of the recordings are going to be made available to you on the distance learning page, which Laura has up to show you right now. You're also going to get an email with a recap. If you haven't checked out any of the videos from the series yet, all of the recordings are there, plus any resources. And if you ask any good questions, we're like, oh, we have something about that, we usually add it to the resources for you afterwards as well. So so many thanks to you, Christian, for leading this series today. And thank you to everybody that stuck with us for 4 days. We hope that you learned and that you enjoyed and that it's inspired you to grow even more. So throw some love in the chat if you enjoyed the series. And if you have questions that we didn't have time to answer today, you can email them to schoolgardens@grownyc.org, and we will do our best to answer them. So thank you all. Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Laura. Thank you to all of you for being with us today. And we hope to see you very soon at our next virtual workshops, which haven't yet been announced, but we will be announcing them soon. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you. Have a good weekend, everyone.